Well done, you found us again. This is the Richard and Judy Book Club in association with WHSmith, and it's with huge relief that I can tell you, we can both tell you, that, that today's book is a resounding success, because we had our doubts. It's called The House of Silk. It's the new Sherlock Holmes novel, and it's written by Anthony Horowitz here. And he had his doubts too, because to basically follow in the steps of a master such as Conan Doyle and such a much-loved genre as the Sherlock Holmes story must have been pretty terrifying, because you've written this as Conan Doyle would have written it. Okay, and it's taken you 10 years to sort of rise to the challenge, hasn't it?
Well, first of all, it wasn't actually that terrifying or that daunting, which it sounds arrogant, and I don't mean it to be, but to be honest with you, I love Doyle so much. He was in my blood. I was given the books when I was 17 years old, and I think you had them also, Richard, when you were
15,
young.
yeah, that's right.
And somehow it enters your system and it never leaves you. And I would not have set out to write this book if I hadn't been pretty certain that I could do justice to Doyle's extraordinary legacy.
Well, you have done, my friend.
So that was the thing. So,
yeah.
So I wasn't frightened of it or daunted. I wrote the first 5 or 6 pages, the prologue as it appears in the book, and I gave it to the publishers. I said, what do you think? Is it any good? And they said, yeah, that's exactly right, you've got the thing. So then I said, fine, I'll sign the contract and I'll write the book.
You had the confidence.
So once I got into it, it was a strange book to write, because it was such a pleasure. Writing can be a struggle, it can be difficult, it can be, you're banging your head. This time, I just loved it.
Well, I'm quite interested actually in the sort of demographics of who reads the original Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I kind of sense it's mostly men. I don't know why I think that, I've got no research. And maybe that's why I've never really read Conan Doyle at all. I didn't like the idea of this detective with his ear flaps and his pipe and all the rest of it. Just didn't appeal to me. So I was slightly apprehensive when I started writing it. But you know, I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it. I found it completely accessible and absolutely fascinating.
You'll enjoy the originals then, because it's just so faithful.
Yeah.
Well, you should. I mean, people have read the book and said now they're going to go back to read Doyle, and that's great as far as I'm concerned. That seems to me to be job well done. But as to what you said, Judy, I must just say one thing. Yeah. The ear flaps are never in the books.
Are they?
Do you know it's one of the Sherlock... He never said two things. He never said elementary, my dear Watson, or whatever it is.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
He never said those words, and he never actually wore the deerstalker hat. That was added afterwards by the illustrator Sidney Paget, who put it on, and it's sort of become part of the... That's exactly right, but it's something that came in later and isn't in the books.
Well, I
little
don't think
bit
they should
of
have done
Holmes
that.
trivia for you.
Thank you, it is trivia, but bad luck then, because I might have read it.
Put you off.
But he did smoke a meerschaum, didn't he? He did smoke the meerschaum.
Well, actually, that also is interesting. That came down to the actor William Gillette, who played the part of Sherlock Holmes on the stage, and had to smoke a pipe, because Holmes does smoke a pipe, but found that he couldn't deliver his lines with the pipe up here. So he had the idea of taking on a meerschaum pipe, which drops a bowl down to there, so he can smoke the pipe and deliver the lines.
We're unpeeling the legend here.
There you are. We've got somebody who has been living Sherlock Holmes for quite a long time.
It's always great to talk to you. I also loved, unexpectedly, Dr. Watson. I just loved the way his kind of gentle, affectionate sort of take on Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes' brother. I didn't realise he had a brother.
Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft turns up in only 4 of the short stories, but like all the characters in Sherlock Holmes, and this is the genius of Doyle, he creates such wonderful, memorable characters. And for a writer like me, who normally starts with a blank sheet of paper, to be given these extraordinary, vivid, wonderfully imagined characters, Lestrade, Moriarty, Watson, Mrs. Hudson, the Baker Street Irregulars, and of course Mycroft. It was a gift.
Yeah.
And now what about, almost all of the Holmes stories begin with a little vignette where Holmes tells Watson what Watson can't believe Holmes has deduced about him. And you've done exactly the same thing. Holmes, you plucked the very thoughts from my head. It must have been very difficult to find something sort of that hadn't been done, that Conan Doyle hadn't done, you know. But you dreamt up a wonderful scenario for that scene.
That's what I love, though, about the original books. In the cardboard box, which is where that's stolen from, the original story is the red circle or the cardboard box, where Holmes just simply guesses everything about Watson from the flicker of an eye. And I set myself the challenge, can I do it?
Did you?
And I loved writing that chapter, which is the first chapter in the book. And I did it in a way to persuade readers of the book that it's okay, you are going to enjoy this book. We're doing exactly what Doyle did, and hopefully we're doing it as well. And so that was that was why it was
You had
there.
me from there, actually. When I read that sequence and laughed out loud, it was very, very funny. And laugh at Watson's amazement yet again. It was so authentic. It was so authentic. I knew it was going to be fun.
I loved writing as Watson. Again, you see, this is the gift of Doyle, to create... I'm not sure we'd like Sherlock Holmes if we met him, you and I, if he came into this room now.
Oh, he's a pain.
He's a painful, difficult, irritating, cold, distant man. But Watson is so affable, so warm, so pleasant. And the one thing I've done which is different is that in my book, Watson is much older. The book is told as an old man looking back.
Yes.
So there's also a sense of an analysis which isn't there. He has much more of a social conscience than the Watson in the original book.
True.
And there's also a sort of poignancy hanging around, the sense that, you know, it's all over and that this is the last adventure, which I think helped me with the writing too.
Yeah, and we must talk about the actual adventure itself, the House of Silk. That is an extraordinary concept. I assume, I mean, it in a sense, it sounds... I won't explain what it is because that would spoil the book, but the concept of this awful, evil thing going on has some modern twists to it. But, I mean, were things like that going on in Victorian times as well?
The House of Silk, and again, we can't give away what it is, is based on a true scandal that took place in 1891, and it did exist. The name is mine, but the actual events and the place and the circumstances are absolutely true to the period and are historically quite accurate. A story I was told incidentally about 20 years ago and has been lingering in my head, waiting to pop up. And of course, once Sherlock Holmes was thrust at me, I thought, wow, I can finally use it. Instant sort of connection of ideas. And, you know, as to the sort of the old-fashioned versus the modern, part of the fun of writing the book was to be absolutely true to the spirit of the original, yet never to forget that it's for a modern audience. So you're right, the plot is in many respects quite modern, the pacing is certainly very modern, and the amount of action-adventure that takes place in it, not quite up to Robert Downey Jr. proportions, I should say. I always think of the films as being a bit Indiana Holmes, which, you know, whereas this is more Sherlock, I think. But I was very conscious of writing for a sort of, you know, somebody who wants a good read and doesn't just want to revel in Victoriana.
No.
Right, well, you say somewhere, maybe in the introduction or maybe it's in some PR stuff about the book, that you were concerned at what the Sherlock Holmes Society might make of it when it was finished. What did they make of it?
Well, all I can say is that so far nobody's been horrible to me, which is great because you've got to understand that the Sherlock Holmes Society is huge. In England they're called Holmesians, in America they're called Sherlockians, or maybe it's the other way around, but they exist all over the world. I mean, there are societies in Russia, in China, in Australia, and these are very intelligent people who are able to recognize a short story. You say 3 words and they'll say, oh, that's Speckled Band. It's extraordinary. They know these books inside out and they take it very seriously indeed. And I was determined when I wrote this book that I wouldn't upset or offend them, because, you know, it is great literature what Doyle produced. They're not just detective stories, they're beautifully written, the characters are brilliantly drawn, and for someone like me to come in and muck things up would have been completely wrong. That's why you don't get, for example, a love story in there. There's no sexual relationships for Sherlock Holmes, because that precisely you'd get all the heckles rising, and lots of things like that. I had lots of rules that I set down to myself, which would keep me very much in the world that Doyle had created.
We should, I mean, Judy's mentioned the plot. I should say it's a bloody exciting story. I mean, it really is a marvellous. I mean, you know,
very dark.
It's very, very dark. I think Conan Doyle would have been thrilled by it.
Well, it's very, very kind of you. And, you know, on 2 things to say there. The first on the Doyle front is Doyle, as you know, was a spiritualist, and I'm not a believer in any of that sort of stuff, but when I was writing this book, and I hope this isn't an overstatement, but there were almost times where I felt Doyle's presence with me, almost as if he was standing, looking down over my shoulder and guiding my hand. It was such an easy write. And so, you know, I had a signed copy of an early Sherlock Holmes book, which I'd picked up in a second-hand shop, on the desk with me. So I had almost my talisman Doyle with me. As to the sort of page-turning quality, you know, I read the Alex Rider books, and I suppose old habits die hard, that whether writing for adults or for young people, it is important for me to get that sort of, you know, what's going to happen next is how I write.
Yeah.
I must tell you something. My great aunt, not by blood but through family and marriage, was Conan Doyle's last PA. She was called Tiny Holland, and she was very tiny, and she was his last PA. And a couple of days after he died, and before the funeral, you know, he said he was going to come back. He promised all his spiritualist friends, "I'll come back." He never did. But she was in his offices, tidying up and very sad. And he had a billiard room above the office that was entirely for his use. And she was the only person in the building, and she heard footsteps coming from this room. So she got the keys, who's here, went up to the next story, empty house. The door was locked. She opened it, and as she opened it, she heard the click of cue on ball, and the door opened, and there was nobody there, and all the cues were in their stand, but the white cue ball was bouncing off the cushion. That's a true story.
The most fantastic story. I'm amazed you haven't told the Sherlock Holmes Society that. It should be printed, published.
I shall send a telegram.
It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story.
It's an amazing story. And she was a Christian woman who wouldn't have made it up.
But sadly, a few days later, when all these people gathered in a theatre with an empty chair there waiting for him to turn up,
It didn't turn up.
Surprise, surprise. Yes, absolutely. Well, anyway, The House of Silk is an absolutely fabulous book in its own right. I think it'd be wrong to say it's an homage to the Sherlock Holmes books. It stands on its own, and you'll absolutely love it. As usual, usual, with all the Richard and Judy Book Club books, there's lots of extra material in the back, only in the books that you get from WHSmith, including the question and answer session that we set up on the page with the writers. And of course, you can now get a book club app. You simply get that on your iPhone, go into WHSmith, point it at the book that you want to thinking of buying, and Judy and I will appear on your screen as if by magic and give you a verbal review, a little piece to camera just for you. Anyway, House of Silk, Anthony Horowitz, fabulous.